time of traveling away from my home.
Something a little different. The great thing, of course, about country music is that so many of the songs tell a story. This is the folk singer Jeff Warner, who has joined forces with our next guest, Matthew Crampton, for a show called Human Cargo. They're performing around the UK with a collection of old stories and songs from exiles, emigrants, convicts and slaves. Matthew's here with us in the studio. How did this project come about? And just tell us a little bit about it.
Well, like most people, I was shocked at the sight of the overcrowded refugee boats back in 2015. And I got to thinking, how does the experience today of exiles compare with the past? I mean, history has always been shaped by the crossing of oceans by desperate people. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries, it was people leaving Britain rather than arriving. And I wanted to see how their experience differed from those of today. I mean, sometimes people left for very different reasons then. So you could be transported to Australia for just stealing a few shillings worth of sugar or clothing or something. Scottish communities were evicted, cleared to make way for sheep during the Highland clearances. But many people leaving Britain were economic migrants, and many also were political migrants. And the parallels are uncanny. You know, the images you see of frightened families sitting on cheap packing cases, being at docksides, being duped onto dodgy vessels by people traffickers. You see that in the 18th and 19th centuries in Liverpool, Dublin, Cork. Young women being trafficked for sex. Young boys kidnapped, forced to make scary solo trips across the world. So we have similar experiences in the past. But then I thought how to give voice to those people. Today we have mobile phones. We can see onto the ships. We can see what's happening. But history tends to be written for the rich, the famous, the lucky, the male. How do we give voice to the exiles from the past? If they had mobile phones,
and you've
what would
found
they
it in song, in music?
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, I went to try and get written testimony, but there ain't so much of that because those folks were not given voice back then. But folk song, which is my area as well, I'm a storyteller and a folk singer, the folk songs we sing come back from the 18th and 19th centuries, and they're the ones that have survived, the ones that were passed down. And the reasons that they survived from the thousands of songs that would have been sung in the past must be that they kind of authentically express what ordinary people wanted to say.
And tell us a little bit about some of those songs. I mean, we've got Amazing Grace, I think, is one of them, isn't it?
Well, Amazing Grace actually is an interesting one. It was written by an ex-slaver. It's possibly one of the most famous spirituals or hymns of all time. It was written by a white slaver. But clearly there's a cadence, there's a rhythm in the flow of Amazing Grace, which must come from hearing the singing of the slaves aboard the ship. An example I love to give, which we talk about in the show, is something a lot of people don't realize, is that during the American Civil War, the American Union Army of the North sent recruiting agents over to Ireland. It was soon after the famine. People were desperate for work, and they often duped young Irish lads into getting a free crossing to America, pretending that they'd be working on the railroads. But when they arrived in New York, they were signed up in the Union Army, and within a week they might be on the battlefield at Bull Run or Sharpsburg. Now, how did those folk then get word back to Ireland to say, don't come? And then you have a song like Paddy's Lamentation, which sends... Do you know the song? It's...
Not necessarily. Can you sing a bit of it?
Well, let me just give you the chorus. This will give you a sense of how you communicate across the Atlantic in those days. Here we are. Here's the chorus. Oh, you boys, now take my advice. To America I'd have you not be coming, for there's nothing here but war, and the murdering cannons roar. And I wish I was back home in dear old Ireland. There was no TripAdvisor in those days. That's the way to get the message home.
And did it?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm not sure how we quantify these things because, again, people, you know, you didn't hear from the poor folk.
John, can I ask a question?
Of course, go ahead.
Because this quantity issue is what's worrying me, because I've talked to some of the people working for the charities who are trying to help the migrants who are in boats on the Mediterranean.
Yes.
And it seems an almost insoluble problem because of the magnitude of it. Now, what these charities are telling me is migration is nothing new. These stories are nothing new, and it's wonderful that you're highlighting the stories in the way that you are for us to understand better who we've always been and who we continue to be in the way we treat each other. However, now it's on a scale that potential host societies can't cope with because of the sheer number of human beings on the planet. Do you find in your work, in your show, where's the hope?
Right. Okay. Well, lots of big questions there. Let's bring it back. So last week we performed in Torrington in North Devon. We played a small art centre there. And wherever we perform the show, I tell local stories of migration. I found out that between 1830 and 1855, from this small part of North Devon, 10,000 people migrated from that area just during those 25 years, which is a huge proportion from such a sparsely populated area. So in terms of proportional impact upon area of people leaving or going, there were very significant similarities with today. I mean, I should also say it's not a political show. I'm a storyteller and a singer, and that's not just trying to run away from issues, but we hear so much about this issue today, spoken very clearly and articulately, intelligently in the news. And I think a lot of people feel distanced from it, even with great feeling and compassion. So by telling stories, singing songs, I'm quite simply trying to engender some empathy. So rather than seeing it as them and us, I think that's all I can try and simply do. And they'll think, well, blimey, every family has migration. Look in your family. Virtually every family has migration somewhere. And we're trying to find something in the pattern of exile that matches the pattern of our own lives.
I mean, I'm very interested in this. I'm going to go and see Human Cargo as soon as I can catch it, because I think it's just fabulous, and I'm so pleased you're doing it, Matthew. My wife migrated here from Jamaica, like so many other people, and at the time of the Empire Windrush, you see all of those migratory phases, and I do think it's really, really interesting to see how that works.
Mark Stevens, Rosemary Hollis, Matthew Crampton, we're going to have to leave it there. We're just going to finish with one more piece of Jeff Warner's music. It's called Away, Idaho. And for now, that is it for this edition of Weekend. More coming up after the news.
We're coming, Idaho. Our four-horse team will soon be seen way out in Idaho.